So I'm going to be speaking their neurological test because I don't have anybody to do it on. My family is currently in New York right now and I'm left behind because school. So let's just get started. So I would knock on the door, wait for a response, go in the patient's room. I would have the patient identify their name and date of birth, check their name and date of birth on their bracelet. Then I would tell the patient who I am. So I'd say I'm Nurse Amanda. I'm going to be doing a neurological assessment on you today. I would explain to them that the assessment includes some various touching as it did the last assessment. And I would ask the patient if they have any questions, if they feel comfortable. And then I would get started. So then once I have the gloves on and everything and I check their name and stuff, I would start with the mental status. So I would ask the patient what day of the week it is, who's the president, and where they are. So I'm just checking to make sure that they're conscious and alert, and I'm just making sure that their speech is clear. And then after the mental status, I would test all the cranial nerves. So I would start with cranial nerve 1, and that's having the patient occlude one nostril at a time. And I would tell them to breathe in. And then once they did that on both sides, I would have the patient close their eyes and I would put something under their nose like a peppermint or cinnamon, something that's a common smell, and ask them what they smell on both of the nostrils. And then that's the olfactory nerve. And then nerve number 2, I would test their visual acuity. So I would have the patient stand 20 feet back using the Snellen chart and then having them read the lines. And then that's the optic nerve. So I would check that on the patient. And then after that, it's cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6. So I would have the patient follow my pen in the 6 cardinal directions of gaze movement, and that's the trochlear, the abducens, and the oculomotor nerves. So I'll be making sure that they're intact. And then after that would be cranial nerve 5. So I would ask the patient to close their eyes and I would touch different spots of their face, like their cheek, their forehead. And then I would make sure the patient's mouth is closed and pull on the jaw, checking their jaw strength. And if it's seeing how the strength is, so if it would be 5 out of 5, then they would have good jaw strength. And then after that would be cranial nerve 7, so that's the facial nerve. So I would have the patient smile, raise their eyebrows, and like frown. So that's just checking the facial movements of the patient. That's cranial nerve 7. And then cranial nerve 8, I would test. This is so weird, I'm looking at myself. Then cranial nerve 8 would be the acoustic nerve, so I would test the patient's hearing. I would do the whisper test on them, having them close one ear, and then I would whisper something on the opposite side, so I could say hot dog, ask them what they heard, they would repeat it back to me, and I would have them do the same thing on the opposite side, testing their hearing. And then after that, it's cranial nerve 9, and I don't know how to say this, glossophageal nerve. So I would ask the patient to swallow, and I would just make sure that the nerve is intact. And then after that, I would have the person stick their tongue out and say ah, and I'm looking at their uvula to make sure that it's intact and rises with phonation, and that's cranial number 10, the vagus nerve. And then cranial nerve 11, I'm asking the patient to push against my hands on both sides, and then I would have the patient shrug up on my hands. So I'm checking their spinal accessory nerve to make sure that's intact. And then the last nerve is 12. It's the hypoglossal nerve. And then I'm asking the patient to stick their tongue out, and I'm looking at the tongue to make sure it's midline. So then after I test the patient's nerves, cranial nerves, I would test the patient's reflexes. So I'd use a tendon hammer, and I would check the patter, the Achilles, the plantar, the triceps, the biceps. I think that's it. On the body, so I would hit on both sides of each of those positions. And then after that, after the reflexes, I would test the patient's coordination. So I would start with the finger to nose test. And then after that, I would have them do it on the opposite side. And then the heel to shin test on the patient. And then after that, we would be doing the Roomberg test. So once that's all done, the coordination, then we're going to move on to the sensory testing. So I would do both sharp and dull sensations, and that's just on the legs. And the finger test, so I would ask them which direction I was moving on a finger that I chose, and I would repeat the steps on their toes. And then when that's all over, that will be the neurological assessment. So then I would take my gloves off, wash my hands, make sure that they have their call light. I would ask them if they feel comfortable or have any questions and concerns, and give them their belongings back. And then that would be the neurological test. So, yeah.